Guest is an award winner and is committed to innovation in the legal industry. Mellissa Larkin is here to analyse the ramifications of businesses not being legally compliant with contracts due to what's currently taking place with COVID-19. Mellissa, welcome to Ticker Newsroom. How are you going?
Well, thank you. And you?
Yeah, really well. Where are you in Australia right now? Are you locked down in Melbourne or somewhere else?
We're safely tucked away in Adelaide.
Oh, very safe. You guys have hardly been affected at all, haven't you?
We've been very, very fortunate.
Very, very good. All right, let's talk about what you've been up to. Really interesting stuff. So, why are Australian businesses cutting corners with contracts, and are they doing it more so at the moment?
But I think it's a really interesting question, and it's one that I think typically businesses, particularly small businesses, only have a certain amount of budget. And so I think they take a view when they're looking at how best to get the maximum bang for their buck about where they're going to spend that money, and they look at things like marketing or investing in R&D, and they look at something like legal as a cost as opposed to ultimately a risk minimization measure which does save money in the long run. So that's always the case, and a lot of companies try to do DIY contracts which again, depending on their appetite, their risk appetite at the outset, they might be very comfortable with that, but they are fraught with risk because those sorts of template documents don't take into account the organisation's, what the product is or the service, or, as I said, their risk appetite. And do I think that it's worse at this point in time? Yeah, it no doubt is, because at the moment, many organisations and businesses are doing it tough, and where they're looking to save money, they will.
Is it a bit of a trend that you've seen? I mean, you've obviously been working in the industry, the legal industry, for a long time. Is it something that's improved over time in terms of people taking the legal side of contracts a little bit more seriously? Does it trend in a direction, or how are you sort of seeing it?
I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've seen a pretty standard trend over that course of time. It's typically when they're in the startup phase, they tend to have an appetite for risk because they're going to spend the money elsewhere, and they're forward looking, and they're looking at how to grow and develop the business. Usually once they hit sort of the 3 million turnover mark, they start to become a little bit more aware of the risks and the policies and procedures they need to have in place to manage their own organisation and the growth internally of their organisation, but also to protect themselves because they've got a stronger footing by that stage in the market. And so at that tipping point, once they sort of become a rapidly growing SME, they quite often are more robust contracts and are going to push back a little bit on the terms.
You've mentioned the word risk there a few times, so let's talk about what that may look like to businesses, I guess, of any size. How can that play out? What are the risks for them?
There are so many different risks when you're looking from a business perspective. So you've got, your operational risks. There are your legal risks, risks with not, complying with legislation or regulation. You've also got, of course, big risks. The current time, and one of the global trends for 2020 is privacy and data. A lot of risks flow from not managing customers' data appropriately. If non-compliance with privacy laws can expose businesses to severe penalties. Failure to comply with the Australian privacy principles and notifiable data breach scheme can attract penalties of up to $2.1 million, and the government's planning to increase this penalty to $10 million for serious breaches. So, these risks are very real risks, and it's not just the financial, the financial penalty that's the risk, but it's also the time it takes for business owners or their executive teams to deal with regulators, to deal with unpacking those sorts of risks. And then there's the brand and reputational issues as well. And, trust is a great differentiator in the market, and that trust in the brand, which if you're not managing your risk properly, you can damage your reputation.
Regulation, I guess, in Australia, the landscape does tend to move quite quickly. There's probably a lot of regulation as well. So for small businesses, what sort of advice would you give for them to manage that and stay on top of how things are changing?
It's a huge challenge for small business. I mean, as you say quite rightly, the regulatory landscape is ever evolving, and it's one of those things which is almost a full-time job, and that's why companies do have full-time compliance teams to keep on top of it. So for small businesses, it's a massive challenge. A lot of them opt to register with their relevant industry bodies so that they get notifications at least when there have been changes to the regulations or the legislation, and they might get a summary of what those changes might mean for them. They still have to then, of course, work through how to operationalize those. Others choose to subscribe to sort of compliance platforms where, again, they get notifications in their specific industry about various changes to the regulations, but again, that can be helpful because it gives you a heads up. But on the other hand, it comes at an expense, which small businesses sometimes don't have the funds to cover. But also, you still need somebody in your business to work through and work out which one of those actually apply to your business, and what do you need to do to operationalize those within the business.
Yeah, interesting. Just finally and briefly, we are just running out of time, but in terms of what the government should know about what Australians, want and are interested in when it comes to privacy and data and keeping those procedures, what should the government be aware of on that side of things?
I think that the Australian people have generally moved over the past few years. They're balancing. It's a very fine line between this need that we have and desire in a fast-paced economy and world to be able to have the ease that comes with technology. But I think people are gradually becoming more and more aware of the risks of signing up to things and giving away their rights over their data and their privacy. And I think the government is well aware of the increased interest that Australian citizens have in being fully cognizant of what's happening to their data and of being told transparently how it's being managed. And I think we see that in terms of the government introducing the Notifiable Data Breaches Scheme in 2018, which I just mentioned, because that requires companies to notify individuals and also the regulator if there's a data breach. So that's really important. And also we've seen it when they've introduced the COVID Safe app. They didn't just roll that out. They undertook a privacy impact assessment, which basically looked to determine what risks, if any, would happen and all of the various factors involved in rolling out an app of that sort before they did so. So I think that both of those points speak to the fact that the government's aware of the increased sentiment amongst the Australian citizens of the need to have their privacy and data managed appropriately and transparently.
Yeah, it's really interesting and things to keep track of. Obviously, it's an ever-evolving, changing world when it comes to this side of things. How can we keep track of what you're up to online? Where's the best place to go?
So our website's www.peripheralblue.com.au, and otherwise my LinkedIn profile is Mellissa Larkin.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Let's talk again down the track. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.